Let's get started. Welcome to the Imba bi-weekly community meeting. So the meetings are usually every second week, but we've been swapping the weeks depending on what's up.
Yeah. I think, is there something wrong with the dates here? This is 4th of May. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
We've been pushing the next meeting a couple of times, so the dates got mixed up. But I think now we're actually back to the regular schedule we were in before.
Yeah. I think so too.
So here are the topics, and these are just like rough notes on things. So we could change them up. But is there anything specific you want to cover first?
No, I think we can go down. As you've probably seen in the repo, I've experimented somewhat with the style stuff myself. So we can go through that when we come to the dynamic styling section.
Nice.
But other than that, I think we can just go down the list.
So with regards to with the V2, I think based on what I've seen, it's just the bugs. But other than the bugs, do you feel like everything has landed for a release?
I feel like most things have landed, and I think the rest of it will land while we write and finish the documentation. So that's been really helpful for me at least, to write documentation, write the documentation for the event handlers. That made me actually tighten up the modifiers and how things worked, just to be able to explain it better. And trying to write out documentation really uncovers the problems and remaining loose threads, if you like. So I think we are pretty close, but I think the documentation will take quite a lot of effort to get right. I think we should, as soon as possible, try to get the new site up and running on v2.imba.io or something, and then start to actively encourage people to use it. One remaining thing that we have talked a lot about back and forth is when we get down to the dynamic styling part, I would like to talk about at least implementing some parts of that that I've been experimenting with and that Eric has proposed. It could be for version 2.1 or something, but I don't think it should be for version 3. I don't think we should wait 1 to 2 years. And because as I've been making the new version of Imba.io, I see that, I knew this already, but I see that even in the simplest components, using scoped CSS becomes a huge mess already. Just the same as if you had external CSS files. It is slightly better, but you end up with a lot of weird utility classes that are trying to fiddle around and make the layout work. That might be because I'm just not that systematic when it comes to styling. But at the same time, I have started to really like the Tailwind approach. And I've always liked the Tailwind philosophy, because that's basically just about having consistent good utility classes that you apply to your elements. You always have a single class to make an element a flexbox. You always have a single class to make it flex in a certain direction, all of that. But there are some downsides to Tailwind as well that I think can be rectified when you control the whole pipeline from when you actually compile the tag trees. In a compiler, you can do a lot of the Tailwind-like stuff in a really neat manner. So that's one of the things I've been experimenting a little bit with the last 2-3 days, and that I can show you later this meeting. So potential release date. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago, and I was thinking maybe June 1st would be a good date. Now I'm kind of inclined to at least explore this CSS thing and see where it takes us first, but at least before summer, maybe June 1st, or if we end up adding some of that CSS styling, maybe July 1st.
Yeah, I see. Like with regards to the styling, I haven't really gotten an opportunity to look deep into the stuff Eric has been proposing. I've just glanced at it. So I'm ignorant here in this case. I don't really know much about it. And also with regards to Tailwind, I've seen it mentioned on meetups and just like glanced at it, but I haven't been really interested in it. So I think it sounds good, but I don't really know anything about it. So for me, like thinking about Imba V2 status, like it seems like if the release is going to be delayed for styling, I don't really know what I think about that specifically, but I think like with regards to the spending a lot of time on styling, I don't know if that's like the best thing to do after a release. It seems like if we do a release soon, we should like focus on stability stuff and get like as soon as we start using Imba v2 on Scrimba or some other bigger code base, like we're definitely going to hit issues. I think we're going to hit various bugs, and those are going to take probably time. And so maybe, sorry.
No, sorry, continue.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe some of them are going to take more time than we actually expect. Like one bug triggers multiple other bugs, and then suddenly you're spending like, many weeks on just bugs.
Yeah. So we can definitely discuss that. I do agree that there will be bugs. I've already uncovered at least, I guess, 4 or 5 pretty big rendering bugs related to compiling tag trees just by writing the new Imba IO, and that's a simple project. So obviously we are going to hit more bugs. I do still think that it is very interesting to look at the styling stuff, because as you were the initial proponent of adding scoped CSS and inline CSS, and I really like that concept. Like it makes things cleaner. It's still messy, but it makes things cleaner. I do think it's an obvious step for Imba eventually to try to not only make tags first-class citizens, but actually create a language that really works well in the whole domain, like markup, logic, and styling.
I think there's a great opportunity there, definitely.
And it is fascinating to see, like, if you read a lot about Tailwind, like people's experiences with Tailwind, you see so many people. I hardly ever seen someone try it out, like really try it out, experimenting with it, and then not liking it. Like it's fascinating to see that almost all feedback they got is this looked messy in the beginning, but after I started using it, it just felt like a revolution in how I actually style things. And the cool thing about that is that I can understand why, and still there is so much of Tailwind that can be made so much smoother if you control the actual templates that you write, because Tailwind is just a CSS framework where they have to generate a million variations of different classes, and it is extremely limited because of the way it works, because it's just a CSS style sheet with some cleanup to remove redundant and unused combinations of these classes. So I can show you later, but I think it's this type of thing, you have to implement it and you have to try to use it in real stuff to see how it works and see if it works well. Like I don't believe in the idea of just writing up some proposal and discussing that and then ending up, that's what we're going for, and then implementing it, because it's so difficult to know about these things until you use it in the real world. So
I have to try Tailwind and see and get it.
We will see. I am going to play around a little more this week with style components and get it to a point where it is usable to test out, or as I can show later, it is already usable, but just try to use it on Imba IO and stuff. If it works as well as I think it will, then I think it's definitely interesting to include in V2. Even if we end up moving the goalpost here, that's what we've done from the very beginning. Like originally it was just going to be drop columns instead of drop columns and a few other things. But again, this is our shot to actually create the language that we've we've used the first version, or I've used the first version for 8 or 9, or I don't even remember, like many years now. And this is the shot to actually take all that experience and create a breaking, changed new version and push it out. So right now, I am actually glad that Imba version 1 isn't really popular, because if it was, this would be much harder. It would essentially, then I would, if I were going to actually create this, then I would have to just abandon Imba and release it under another name as a new programming language, I think.
So yeah, I definitely get the argument for that, and also for us, like who were actually using it a lot.
Yeah,
it's like, and I'm thinking about Imba 1. It's like we're in a bubble, right? So now I'm starting to think like with regards to application development, yes, we can use Imba 2, but it's gonna be very painful, and also if we do the styling things right, that's gonna mean like then stability is not going to be really that prioritized, right? So it's going to be the features and whatever is being explored. So I think then it might make...
Obviously, stability has to be a priority at some point. And I think already, like as long as we are good at exposing bugs, writing tests for them and fixing them, I really don't think the bugs are the biggest challenges. Like, yes, it takes some time, but among the bugs I found while writing Imba.io, it ended up being a few hours per bug maybe to fix the tag rendering. And so stability should obviously be a priority, but it's something we need to
I think this is definitely cool, like with regards to like what can happen with the syntax and how nice it can be. Like, I think for me, it's like hard to imagine it, because who knows what we're going to come up with at the end, or what you come up with if you experiment for a while and then try different things. So it might be much better than currently what you can do.
Yeah.
But like, it seems, if we're gonna, I'm not sure how to to say it in a proper way, because what I'm thinking is like, if we're pushing in the direction of we're gonna focus on new syntax, like that's gonna take time away from stabilizing it, basically. So if someone starts trying V2 and the only thing they experience is like, okay, I know what Imba is now, but I can't like write it because I'm just hitting issues after issue after issue. So if we are currently in just a really unstable state that's just temporary, then I think it's fine. But if this is the current state, like all throughout until it's so replaced Imba 1, then I think we're gonna turn off users, definitely. People are going to try it, and then they're going to think, whoa, the promise is not there.
Yeah, but that's the whole, like, that's the whole obvious challenge with releasing something early, as opposed to using it yourself and altering it and improving it. Because as long as you do want to try to improve things, like really make it shine, then you will have to use it yourself, feel how it works, experiment with it, and make changes. And while it is in that state, it is difficult to use it for people who are not really involved. That is the whole problem. So I do agree that as long as there will still be a lot of experimentation and stuff like that, it is not something you should really encourage people to use, unless you have really good change logs showing all the changes, how to migrate, all of that. But still, it might end up changing back at some point, right? But that is the way you can actually find out what features are good and what features are not good. So the only alternative I see is to develop it fully closed, like not releasing any alpha and just using it yourself for a long time. And I don't think that's a better approach. I think it's better to be open about it. And as long as it is in alpha, I think we still have the opportunity to change up things. As the moment we move to beta or to final release, then obviously we are not going to change important syntax parts. Like we're not going to change up the syntax of the language anymore until something like version 3 or 2.5 or whatever. So right now it is in a chaotic state, but that's just the same as you could see with Imba 1 as well. And it took a long time before it started maturing. But now I think it's better to let it mature a little before we release it like an official version 2. And then we will see. But I think the main thing, just writing Imba IO in version 2, I'm confident now that it is relatively close to something that can be released, except the besides the CSS stuff. Because yes, I hit problems, but it wasn't like much more problems than in Imba 1. I know how I want to do things. I know how I don't think that was a major problem for me. But then again, I see that you created projects and you actually run into show-stopping bugs pretty regularly. So these bugs we have to identify,
at least,
test, and fix.
Yeah, and I really do feel bad about some of them, because like some of them you really do get frustrated, and then you just close the project up. Like I've gotten to that several times where I've thought out the thing. I know how to write this, and Imba has the tools for it, and you can just write it the way you want to. But with V2, like if I use Imba V1 today, I think I can do almost anything I want, because like it's fairly stable. So there are a few issues you hit, but with V2, I need to, I think I'm going to do what you said, go into the test suite again and then add the specific tests on the things that are breaking.
You should definitely do that. That will make it so much easier for me to fix them. And I also think that some of the reason that you think that you can now do anything with Imba 1 and basically nothing with Imba 2 is that there are changes from Imba 1 to Imba 2 as well, that if you're not aware of them, it might be frustrating. Like you can't now create a on-click method on your tag and expect that to trigger when a click is triggered. Now you actually have to add event bindings in the rendering tree. Things like that will make it more difficult. Like with the new documentation, it's definitely not done, but even when it's like 50% done, I think already it will be easier for people to start with Imba 2 than Imba 1, to be honest. But there are still a lot of challenges remaining as well on the build side and how you bundle projects and those things. Like as you saw, you written that in the third topic today. For Imba IO, I moved back to just using Webpack instead, just because the rollup dev server didn't support HTTPS. And so there are...
So I think that's good. If there's anything else you think that might help make things easier for you, you could just say so. So
it's definitely by far the biggest thing is to have clear test cases that actually fail and that actually show how things are supposed to work. Because without that, it's very difficult. Like the file you sent me on Slack is, to me, it's extremely difficult to understand, like even begin to understand what the problem could be. Because as I see it, it looks just like a regular, completely fine custom tag with the render method.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
It makes sense. So should we add another slot for documentation here, or do you just want to continue with the remaining topics?
I think we just continue, and I tried to schedule a meeting with Eric around documentation as well, but I had some time zone issues, so I ended up he called me in the middle of the night, and I thought we were going to call him in the middle of his night, so we have to reschedule that. But I think we can continue talking about the documentation later. I think we should, as I said, as soon as possible. Maybe you can try to make it work so that it automatically pushes to v2.imba.io and is exposed there for people, so that people can follow along. And Eric has also started to, I think, to move some of the things from docs.imba.io into the repository of Imba v2, of the v2 site. And I'm this is just not something we have to discuss now, but I'm also considering like Svelte to actually move the site into the main Imba repository, because it does make sense, especially all the content of the site, like all the documentation and all the examples. It really makes sense to keep that in line with the actual library, because then you can much more easily say that, okay, so for this version at this point in the repository, this is the documentation, instead of having two separate repositories that essentially,
Yeah, you could add it as a top-level documentation directory or docs, or
or just like
sense.
Svelte has done, just add it as a site folder in the top level, and inside of there you have content and you have the actual source for the site.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then that like everything would be happening in the main mono repository.
Yeah.
So the next topic is the Visual Studio Code extension. There, I've also been doing a poor job. I keep experiencing bugs, but it's like the bugs are so like, now it's at the point where they're just small things, nothing big. So it's like sorry.
No, for me, it's actually still pretty huge bugs. I experience it all the time, that the language server stops working, that completions that are supposed to come from TypeScript doesn't work anymore. There are a ton of small and big issues there. I've written a lot of them down and I'm going to go through them, but I haven't had time to really clean it up yet. But I am going to, hopefully this week or probably next week, do a day or two again to bring the tooling up to speed with the latest changes, and also just try to work out bugs.
But I think it's other than the bugs, it's really nice to use. So it works, and the shortcuts jumping between files works nice, and also surprisingly it works well with Imba v1 code also. But
yeah, some of the some of the jump to definition and stuff works for Imba v1. That's things that don't really touch the TypeScript servers at all. It just uses our own parsing of the Imba files, but it should work for a lot of the examples.
Yeah, so when do you think like we should try to do a demo? Where I was thinking with the demo we would actually go through the whole VS Code thing in either several chunks where it's episodic, and here are the specific features, or one long chunk with 1 hour something, just showing everything.
Yeah, so right now I think it is still too buggy, at least from my experience when I started using it for other things than creating the extension itself. I've met a lot of problems, so I do think we need to delay that a little bit, because it's just frustrating to start to go through an extension and then during the walkthrough actually run into a lot of show-stopping bugs. So
so so you're thinking of coming back to this later?
Hopefully next week. It's the plan.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the next topic is the rollup configuration, and you mentioned the HTTPS stuff. So like, I don't remember everything again. I probably said that a couple of times before.
Yeah.
Because like, we did talk about Imba rollup, but
yeah,
after using Imba for various different applications, now Imba V2, like, yes, rollup is a really nice tool and it's awesome for front end stuff. But when we're using it the way we're using it with, if you're making like these really bigger applications and they're doing relatively more complex stuff than a simple static site, then like rollup and the way we've done it with hiding it away, that's really sucks. It's like, it's hidden away. You can't really do anything. And I don't want to set up my environment to link to Imba rollup and then run my own version locally. And it's like, you have to do a lot of stuff just to get things working, at least when you're doing node stuff on the front end.
What do you mean node stuff on the front end?
When you're using node dependencies, dependencies that both work in a node and also work in the...
I think, I agree. That's one of the reasons I thought we should reconsider changing. And that's just that rollup is pretty... rollup is not smart when it comes to trying to pick out web versions of things versus node versions of things. And so it is much more painful. There will be a lot of dependencies that will cause problems when packaging them with rollup, but that will work flawlessly when packaged via Webpack. So
like, I'm curious, like, what are we going to do there? Are we just going to say, roll your own thing, do whatever you want, or are we going to continue in this Imba rollup direction?
I think for now, it's probably fine to just let people use Webpack, like the example from V2 Imba.io. I think Eric used it with success. And we are going to keep but refine the concept of an Imba config file, because that's important for many things down the road. But I do agree that we need to... so one of the reasons I created Imba rollup was because initially we didn't support compiling to CommonJS on Node, so that we had to actually bundle the Node, the server-side files as well as the client-side files. But now that we do support CommonJS, albeit still with some bugs, I don't think rollup is needed for that, and that makes it more natural to let people go with Webpack. But again, I think this is one of the things we can start out with just on templates that works. But eventually, I do think this is something we will need to work on a lot, like make the whole build steps of Imba work really well. And that is difficult because there are so many different tools for bundling and packaging. And my goal eventually is to just try to make it smooth enough that you don't really need all these other bundlers for an Imba project. But
that makes sense. But I think like the main issue now with at least the types of project I'm using it in is needing a way to like add plugins.
Yeah, but what kind of plugins are you? What kind of plugins have you experienced or have you like needed?
Yeah, let me think back now. So it's been like different types, like right off the top of my head, I don't have any particular ones, but I think it was mostly related to CSS plugins that I was experimenting with.
Yeah.
And also but that's resolved, the CommonJS issue.
Yeah, because that's one of, I think we could just say that we need to think more about this and move on to the next point, because as you talked about with the styling, like talking about styling in CSS in general, one of the really big complicating factors in these build processes is exactly CSS and styling. Some people want to use less, some people use Sass, some people use regular CSS. They want to merge style sheets together. They want to import styles across different source files. They want to use a combination of scoped CSS and inline CSS and actual CSS files. I think this is a sign that styling is just not well integrated enough in these web applications in general. Like take Tailwind as an example. Just getting Tailwind to work really well in a project is quite difficult. You need to have a lot of steps. You have to use post CSS. You have to send your bundle through the post CSS processor to search through the source code and eliminate unused class combinations from Tailwind. And there were just, that is just one example, like actually setting it up. I think Eric still hasn't really managed to set up a working Tailwind project with Imba. I guess he's ended up just using the whole Tailwind development CSS file, which is 2 megabytes or something. So again, we can discuss that, but I do think with better styling support in Imba, a lot of that should go away as well, a lot of those problems, because I think you should not want to or need to use, let's say, Sass or SCSS inside of your Imba file in a project. You shouldn't really even need to have a Sass file somewhere in your project. Maybe you want to have a plain CSS file with some resets or something, but most of the basic styling should be possible to do without it. And I know that we are probably quite not. I think we're not agreeing about this point, but because we have discussed it a lot earlier, the whole styling issue. But I think we both have to admit that looking at the issues and the interest from this small community we already have, I think the actual styling part of it is probably the thing that has gathered the most discussion and the most passionate feedback and even suggestions for how to do it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, styling has definitely been a topic that people are interested in. I definitely agree. So, but like again, the stuff Eric has been proposing, I haven't really dug into that. So I don't know like what I could say around that. So
I think the idea is pretty good, like the proposal he had now recently. I think it is a lot of custom things that will. I don't think it's the way to go. I think the basic idea is good, but I think there are much more elegant ways to do it. Syntax-wise, that doesn't require as many changes to the language, and also just generally. So I wouldn't talk about like, should we implement that proposal, but it's more like this is definitely a sign that people, and especially Eric, are interested in trying to solve the how to do styling efficiently in applications. And from our own experience, like from Scrimba and basically any project, I know so well that you very often end up with a tangled mess of different CSS styles overriding each other at different places, and there are a lot of pain and complexity associated with that. So I think it's definitely worth looking into if we can remove a lot of that complexity and make it easier for people.
Yeah. So
and also just as an example, like the main concept of Tailwind is, and other CSS frameworks, frankly, but is having a bunch of utility classes that you can use again and again, right? So you have flex and flex align and the text bold and text purple 200, all of these classes that lets you efficiently set styles directly on the components themselves or on the tags themselves. One of again, I really like that idea, but one of the cool things about that, if you move it into the language itself, is that when you create a component, so if you created some sort of component that you want to be reusable outside of your project, but let other Imba developers also use the same component, if you use the same, essentially the same utility CSS library or toolkit, then you don't need to ever include any CSS or anything in the components you have. If you just created a component following these patterns that are now largely inspired by Tailwind and their naming conventions and feature set, then I could include your component in my application, and it would like magically be styled without you adding any extra CSS or without. So I could actually just use that component and it would be styled in my kind of design language in my project. And that's also very difficult to do if you have inline styles, or if you don't do styling at the language level. But yeah, now I'm just ranting. So
no, it definitely sounds cool, and I think like the main issue I have right now, it's not the issue really. It's just that I need to read up more and just get a better understanding, because like I don't feel like everything you're talking about and what I'm hearing, right, is like it's just I don't know. Like I really don't know. It's strange, fremmed. But I will read up and then I'll try to contribute more on that side. But then I definitely want to make it clearer, because then it seems like, okay, then I'm not going to push back on this because the reason why I wanted to push back was just to get something out there and then have a different development track for Imba. But it seems like this is much more interesting, because if it's really nice and it improves your productivity. I don't know. So it seems like this could have a very positive direction for people who are going to write Imba in a couple of years or a couple of months.
So could I just, if I share my screen, I could just show a tiny example of how it's like.
That would be great. Let me stop sharing there.
Let me see. I need to find share. So again, this is very early. There are, do you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see your screen.
So there are definitely syntax things I do want to change. It's just an experiment now. And if you haven't seen something like Tailwind, then this will probably, this might seem pretty weird. But essentially, like after we changed the handlers, as I mentioned in that issue, where we changed the event handlers to start with @ instead, like @click, @scroll, @whatever. And I figured we could use this colon thing to actually define a special type of dynamic classes. We might end up using something else, but the whole point here is that now I have a tag here with some stuff, and it has no styling whatsoever. So it will look really weird, but if I refresh it here, I don't think I actually, did I save it? Just let me see. No, yeah, now I saved it. So you see there are just a bunch of things without any styles, right? So first of all, let's say I want to add some padding. So I could create a CSS scope thing here, and I could do XApp and add some padding, right? But if you want to follow the Tailwind-like approach, then you have a bunch of utility class names that are both just convenient, really shorthand ways to apply common types of styles. But it's also a way to force you into following kind of a design pattern. So it encourages you to use unitless paddings that are predefined at the project level, for example. So if I just do this is the awkward part. Now I just use Annie as a keyword because that's just what I came up with during testing. So now I'm essentially saying that this is in any hovers, in any state, like any pseudo state of this tag, then I will have a bunch of utility class names. So if I do P10, again, if you knew Tailwind, this is the same as as P10 is just padding and then 10 units on all sides. So if I refresh this now, you will see that, why was this outside? Yeah, okay. Let me just wait. It's because, yeah, this is a good example actually. That the reason padding wasn't applied now is that tags, custom tags, don't have any display value at all originally. Like you probably experienced that. So you need to add a CSS scope thing where you only write XApp display block or display flex or whatever, because they have display initial. And that means that they are not stylable with padding and margins and such. So then I would, as with Tailwind, it's just block because I want to style it as a block. So now it's styled as a block. So instead of spending a lot of time here, I can just show you some of the more convenient fancy features. So if we want to style this button, I'm just going to style the text color. So instead of any, I am considering doing like some sort of keyword like that, or actually using the base classes. So I could just do purple 200, or let's see, if I do any text purple 200 or 400. Again, try to visualize that you have the tooling that actually auto-completes and shows you information about all these utility class names and what styles they actually apply. So now you have that color purple. That's fine enough. Now the cool thing is that you can start adding these pseudo classes. So if I do hover, then I do text purple 600. Now when I hover it, yeah, it happens, but it's just not so easy to see because it's still purple. And I'm using the material design colors, which doesn't really change that much. Now it has a different color on hover. And for you can have all these sorts of pseudo classes. That's not possible in Tailwind, but here you can have pseudo classes for like MD hover. That means that these pieces of utility extensions here, they will only apply when the screen is of medium size. If this is a predefined in Tailwind, MD, SM, XS, LG, and XL are predefined responsive pseudo states for different screen sizes. So this would only show like this on a medium screen size in hover. And you can also, if I want to style these items here, I can do odd text, or I don't actually. In Tailwind, you have to include text, but in the initial thing here for text coloring specifically, you don't even need to include that. But now every odd LI will have the purple color, like you see here.
Nice.
And it looks, right now, it probably looks pretty cryptic, both because of these weird anythings that you start with. But as long as, if you start reading up on the documentation of Tailwind and understand that all of these helper utilities will be available just the same way they are in Tailwind, then you can really start to see that you can create really complex styles that also includes these dynamic styles. And it becomes more advanced than this, because I could also include like, instead of hover, this will hover only, this style will only be applied. Let's say if I have styler, just need to see if I haven't added all the rules, but if I can add, yeah, underline, I've added underline. That's a good style. So now hover underline. Let me see, where was I? So now you see that all of the elements will be underlined when hovered. But I could also do like, just even inside of here, even underline. I don't have there's some parsing issues, so I don't support 2 modifiers right now, but this should be possible. That, I mean, even hover, then only the even allies would get these styles.
I see. So you're chaining the modifiers.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but right now it's so now the odd ones will be purple and the evens one will be underlined. And so if I want to,
it looks powerful.
Yeah, but and as long as you read up on Tailwind and understand how that works, it is really powerful. And as opposed to Tailwind, because they need to pre-create all these classes, so they only have a class for padding x1, x2, x4, x8, etc. We can also allow inline arguments. So I can do here, if I want to pad this element here, only the under the inline items, I list. I can do like even underline and do px px5. This means like x, as in Tailwind, is both left and right. So this would be px 5 units left and right, as you can see here. But you can also have, if I add another argument, then it's like left and right. So I can do different margins on left and right. And this goes for padding and margins and positioning as well. So again, I'm just running through this now, but it is really powerful. But again, if I want to style, I can still use regular classes and style things using regular CSS. If I just drop any of these types of declarations, everything will be as before, like you would expect. But you can also use much more powerful types of modifiers here. So I could do something like up and include a selector. So only when HTML is loading, and then underline or hidden or whatever. So that would essentially mean that this compiles, all of these compiles to specific single class names that are magically included on the elements. So it doesn't apply any inline styles or any, doesn't combine different styles, style rules in the style sheet or anything. This would end up creating a selector where these styles are applied only when the document above this element matches this CSS selector. So with the different types of conditions and having all these utility styles, then my guess is that you can essentially end up creating huge parts of your projects without a single line of CSS. And instead of actually going, like that's one of the pains I've experienced while working on Imba.io, is that, let's say I have the REPL here. I'm trying to, could I just close all? Don't say. So here I have the REPL file. I have a bunch of tags here. I added a lot of class names just to be able to style them from some other place. But I also already included a Tailwind-like, if you see theme here, I ended up adding a lot of Tailwind-like helper methods, helper styles from Tailwind. That you wouldn't need anything like that if you go for the inline CSS idea. But again, one pain point here is that I end up sitting here and then I need to end up scrolling down to the CSS, and it's not really well connected to the rendering tree. And also, if I start doing responsive stuff, that's where Tailwind really shines. Then you end up having styles all over the place that affect the elements in one way or the other. But using something like Tailwind, you would essentially move all that styling into here with clearly defined utility classes that can be auto-completed and shown like what they do on hover and etc. But you can also easily, if I want this thing here to be flex in the other direction when when the screen is small. I essentially do like, I do flex row, and then SM, which is for small screens, I do flex col. So you can sit there and fiddle around and make the
That's nice.
yeah. And I can actually, I think even that works now. I can show it if this is a demo thing, but if I now do LG, I just want to see if I have LG defined here. Yeah. I just do, where was I? LG, and then the reason I'm thinking so much is that there are a ton of things I haven't added from Tailwinds, and most of the visual things I haven't added yet. So I don't have like text bold and these types of things. So I need to show everything with colors, because that's one of the things I have implemented. But again, now this P here should only be blue when the screen size is more than 1024 pixels wide. So I hope this actually works now, but yeah, so now it's blue, and now it's not blue.
I see it.
And we didn't change anything in the HTML. Everything is compiled to actual CSS classes. And if we look at that class, if I go here, you will see that, yeah, so this was the actual class that was created. It's created just for that specific element and wrapped inside of a media query. And the reason this looks weird as well is that you see that we have text. The color is encoded with HSLA, where you can also independently change the text opacity, so that I can do any text opacity 0.5, and then I can do hover text opacity 1. Maybe this works. I hope it works. Let me see. Do I have text opacity here? Let's just I need to. I didn't add text opacity yet, but I can do
Background.
BG red 200. I guess that's a problem. Something. BG red, BG opacity, and then do BG opacity 1. Hopefully. So now it's red, and it has 0.5 opacity, and on hover it has 1. So you can really combine a lot of different styling logic directly inside of the tag tree. And even though the tags will get crammed and it will look complicated at some point, we can make it relatively clean by improving both the syntax and also the highlighting. But it is also really encouraging that you will end up with examples where the logic inside of here is everything that is related to this element. Like, I don't need to fiddle around in lots of different external CSS files that all interact and override each other, etc. I can fiddle around directly inside of the render tree until I think it works well in all responsive modes and whatever. And you can see the powerful examples of that with the Tailwind UI, which is the developers of Tailwind have created a commercial UI library, essentially, that just styles things using Tailwind. And there you can just see, like, actually, these things have no external style sheets. It's just utility classes on all the elements that create this behavior. Like, this requires JS because I guess it needs to see when the menu is large enough to be able to expand, etc. But generally, like, this is a good example. Like, the breakpoints here saying that when the screen becomes small, then we want to move this, change this list here to be vertical instead. That is so much nicer to be able to do directly inside of your components than do in a bunch of media queries that use made up class names. You end up adding a lot of made up class names to your elements just to be able to hook into them and style them from somewhere else. But yeah, this it's kind of early. I think I've mapped out most of it in my head because I have been thinking about it for some time now. But I do think it's you will really enjoy it when you start using it, like when the tooling is there, etc.
Can you go back to the code?
The code where? Here?
The code you were looking at. So I definitely see like how much better it gets, but like on a first glance, it definitely does look weird. So so that's the one thing. But
I think both, like it could be highlighting, like even if you did something like just try to imagine that you instead it's more clearly separated the kind of class. You can look at any of these things here, like mixins, that you are inline mixing in some predefined style behavior. I think highlighting will help a lot, and I think the any keyword is awkward. It could be better to just allow inlining styles directly, because most of the time you won't use these. Most of the styles will be like basic styles without any conditional states.
But do we also need to like distinguish them from regular click modifiers?
Yeah, they are not the same as like this. This is an event, and the modifiers in the event are just different things. If something is inside of here, then it's just a whole different type of modifier. It is a style modifier instead. So we don't, but highlighting wise or syntax in the tools, we obviously need to differentiate between them to let people more easily, see what's what. And and maybe at some point we might want to also allow if I have a really long, because some things, like if you have a button style that you haven't pulled out into a style sheet, it could be really long. Like you have PX1, you have PT 0.5. You end up with a lot of different things like that. It would be very nice to have, probably to have a special syntax to be like CSS buttons or whatever. So this is just example, but where you can actually in your files predefine, create like expandable combinations of these mixins.
Cool. I have to try this out. So this, what you're using right now, is only locally, right? So you haven't released that.
I have uploaded in the inline style branch or whatever I called it.
Okay.
But it's smart styles. But I am going to fix more things on it today. Especially I'm going to, because that doesn't take a lot of time, I'm going to add most, or at least many more of the tailwind things, so that you can, until we've documented it well, when you want to test it out, you should be able to just look at tailwind documentation, because the tailwind documentation is fantastic. And then you can actually trust that, okay, so in tailwind, there is a class name called inline flex. Then you should trust that, so I can just use inline flex here, because it follows the patterns from tailwind. What else? Yeah, and there are so many cool things you can do also with transforms that Tailwind also does. So you could have a button where you essentially say that it has, you can just say that it has transform and then scale 1, and then you can do hover scale 1.25. This is enough to actually say that when you hover this, the scale will change to 1.25, and then you can also do that with other elements as other things as well. So x to px. That's another thing that I want to mention, that I want to run by you. since we do want to support, since this is very much a client-side language as well as the server side, I do think it makes sense to parse numbers with units directly. Do you think that's an okay idea? So if I write 2 pixels somewhere, or just 1.5 EM, or 20 rem, whatever, that these essentially are highlighted as they would be in a CSS file, and that they are just compiled to the string version of them.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, because like if we're gonna do more CSS this way,
yeah,
then I think that's much nicer. Then you wouldn't need the extra quotation marks or whatever it is, and you don't
definitely
like. It would be nice if it was like optional, like, so it's not an error if you do have them and you're used to typing them out, but if you don't want to type it and you get the syntax highlighting. Yeah,
it will look much smoother because of the syntax highlighting. And another cool thing is that we can also, with these dynamic, now I'm moving into territory where Tailwind would never be able to do these things because they aren't part of the HTML compilation toolchain. But here we could also start doing like W is just a width modifier. You can also do width, but so I can say that this element here, like div any, I hate that anything. Let's say that you can do it directly with these classes. And I do width 2 pixels, that's okay, or 20 pixels, but we can also compile calculated dynamic things. So I could do with 100 VV versus minus 40 pixels. This could actually inline in the style sheet compile to with calc 100 VV versus minus 40 pixels. Nice. But an even cooler thing is that we can also do it like, if you in render here, do scale 1, let's say X, and actually pass in a dynamic variable like you have, or even smoother. I'm going to style a pseudo thing. So I do before, or maybe it's just before, content, and then state. Then this would essentially compile for, even if you reuse this tag here 1,000 times, this part here would then compile to a style class, which is identifier, blah, 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 before content var some unique var ref. And then upon rendering, it would, when it actually goes through and render, it will basically set that some unique var ref to this value. So you can then even use like, use these dynamic values inside of the style modifiers in a really efficient way. Because it's important to remember that if this was a list item, even if you had 1,000 versions of this list item, there will only be a single style rule in the CSS. Like, it would be compiled to a single style rule for this type of element. And then each element that is rendered will set its own unique var ref. Did you understand that?
Yeah, I understood it. Yeah. I'm just thinking. So this seems very good. It seems very good. Like, I definitely have to write some code to get the feel for it. Because like, it seems it could eliminate a lot of styling code, and you could actually choose to have no CSS at all in your whole code base, and you could.
And that's pretty cool that you can even like bundle, you can create an Imba file and you don't even need to include a single like default style sheet. All the styles are created efficiently included, and it will make the style sheets much, much smaller, because you will essentially end up just you will end up with style sheets that just includes the styles that you actually added into your templates. And if I didn't have any styles here, then it would not include any styles in the compiled file. but it will gradually like include exactly just what it needs. And you can see that in the example, like if I do I want to inspect the style of the whatever here, I can look at the styles. They probably look a little ugly now. These are the styles that are created for this. And so even if this thing here, it looks like there's a lot going on, I think when we were at a very different, yeah, my whole point is that even if it looks like, oh, there are a lot of things going on here, then you will see that the styles you would have to write to actually give it the same behavior would be just a lot more, and it would be separated from the elements. So yeah.
Cool. This seems very fun, and I'm definitely going to experiment some more with Tailwind, and I'm going to do that today. So maybe I can come with some feedback on that. But I think Eric is definitely someone you should.
I have been talking a little bit with him, and I think he will probably try it out really soon. And it as I said, it definitely needs to be. There are a lot of things missing still, but the core concepts are already working well. I just need to add more of the Tailwind stuff so that you can actually try it out.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, I still have to try Tailwind, but like with the names, like it could be like, is it too much branching off to come up with a better naming scheme, or do you think Tailwind is definitely the way to go?
So I think obviously for some things, I think we should at least allow aliases. Yeah. Aliases. And I already added, let's say, an alias for this, because background opacity is something you can actually, you might use quite a lot, because that's a really useful way to do things when you hover over buttons or list items or whatever. So I added a BGO, like tiny alias for background opacity. I'm not sure we should go in that direction and make things more obscure, but I do think one of the real benefits of Tailwind is that it has extensive documentation and has really well thought through names for these things. Because that's one of the things I've been missing. I create my own CSS utilities in every project and use slightly different names for things. But you can see that if you go to Tailwind, then okay, align content, they always use content dash and the align content value. For padding and margin, they use P, they use PY, PX, PT, R, L, B, etc. I think it's very well thought out. The font style, italic, non-italic. Sure, there might be some things we want to change, but I do like the idea of following the conventions set by Tailwind for the most part.
It sounds good. So I look forward to trying this out, and I also need to follow up on the bugs. The ones I was thinking about. So I think we should maybe wrap up, or is there anything else we should cover?
No, I agree. But you're like, you think it's worthwhile. While now that I've presented you the concept, you think it's worthwhile exploring more? At least?
Definitely. Yeah. So the problem I have, like, when I see these things is like being able to visualize it and then see, like, I've seen Tailwind, but I said, okay, it looks interesting. Yeah. But there are so many interesting things out there. Like you can't pick everything, but this looks like, okay, let's say you're writing a one-off Imba or one-off app specifically. You have a problem. Yeah. That's going to be so much easier to do with this kind of syntax. And also for the issues I've seen with the scoped CSS, like one thing I was, not to be negative, but like the implementation you did was good enough in the beginning, but the more you use the comment blocks, it's like you're starting to see issues, and then you wish, like, especially with Imba 2, like there are just some things where you position stuff and so on, and then it breaks the build. So this is definitely more flexible.
Yeah. There are one thing I didn't touch on, which is also an interesting concept that we need to figure out. And that is, let's say I have a markdown module. Like I have some div markdown here. and then I just have inner HTML generated markdown. That's an actual kind of concept we have in the Imba IO example, where we have these app document tags that actually include some pre-created markdown HTML. Now the question is, in Tailwind, you kind of screwed, like, how would you actually style this here, right? Because the generated markdown just includes plain H1, H2, P, whatever. So one idea I am thinking about there, if you want to do that, is that you could have these magical tag-like elements as well, which is, instead of being an actual tag, instead of being an H1, again, I don't know the syntax, it would essentially be like, this is a representation of the tags that will match this thing here. So again, completely weird syntax, but then you could do like MT 0.5, like margin top, or margin top 10 pixels, text bold, teal 800. So this would compile to just a CSS selector that matches H1 elements inside of this element, and it will apply all these classes and also apply these pseudo classes. So hover, underline. So any H1 element inside of this div here will have underline when hovered, and they will also be bolded and of color teal 800, and with a margin top of 10 pixels. So that's just an idea.
This looks very interesting, definitely. Like, I've had a couple of issues where I've been experimenting with some things.
Yeah.
This, like, not specifically what you're writing there, but something close to that is something I've tried to do. I was also thinking about another issue now, because you showed this. I wasn't planning on mentioning it, but like maybe this could be solved with this kind of approach, like where you have a lot of text, and you end up using a lot of spans, you end up using a lot of multi-lines, but what you're really doing is you have some static text, and the text is fine, and you're just going to style the text and then render it on screen, but you have some stuff that's being modified there. So that's like in Imba, that also in Imba 1, it's very painful because you end up with so many tags and with so many strings, and then you have some spaces at the end or at the beginning of the string. So I think that type of syntax would solve that use case, and it does come around frequently.
So I know the reason I started thinking about this kind of syntax is that just think about the scenario where you have a bunch of labels, like div for label in labels, and then you do div and it's a label, so label title, but I want to style them like this label. The first label is should have color red and the other should have color blue. So how would you do this in this dynamic style? Because that's really painful. Then you start doing like BG blue 300, but that should only be for the blue one. So one thing you could do is you could add a bunch of these, like is or matches or whatever, blue, or so is red, BG red, blah, blah, blah. But then you start having a huge bunch of styles there, right? That might be something you want to reuse or define somewhere else. Again, one cool about this type of syntax here is that you could even on the app level or somewhere, I can just do CSS blue. I do that one, and also with the hover, I do BG blue 400, so it's tighter. Red, BG red. And then, so now I'm essentially creating CSS classes with this selector here and these styles. And again, that includes pseudo styles like hover, and I could also do like only on small screens, do whatever. Now I can actually use this right here. So I can use the old stuff, like actual CSS class names in Imba still. So I could do label color here. So these elements would get actual class names of blue and red, but the styles for them would be declared here. Yeah.
Yeah, this seems very flexible. I was just thinking the positioning. Like, what if you wanted, like, are you thinking you would position that close to where you're using it, or would you put it closer to the data?
You would. I think often you would. That depends. I can see some sorts of, if this would be the way we actually add native classes, I could see that you almost at the root level or at the top level of a big component, you would define like button and then include a bunch of default styles for button. And then you essentially everywhere else in that component can write, just add the class name of button. I think, again, it's cool that this is still scoped, so it will never be applied to something that is outside of this, like at a level above this CSS rule where it's defined. But you might end up even at the app root defining some of your really persistent types of reusable styles here, I guess. But again, there aren't that many reusable styles. It's mostly buttons and form fields. And where Tailwind really shines, I think, is in actually creating the layout, like which elements are flexible, what is the break point for moving from horizontal flexing to vertical. All of that will remove so much CSS.
But do you get any, like, does Tailwind define any animations or transitions things?
Yeah, you can, in Tailwind, you can do set up,
okay.
Let me see, transitions for all sorts of things. So, and that would work exactly like Tailwind. Hopefully a little more concise, because it's the syntax, since they have to use just tons and tons of different CSS classes, they end up being just a lot of classes. So I think we can use actual like mix-ins where you can have arguments. So instead of these three classes, we could see ourselves having like just a transition where you actually have arguments like 100 ms and whatever. And again, that would be so awesome with the tooling where you have signature helpers as well. So it's, you start writing transition, you get an auto-completion that's showing what that style mix-in does, and it will jump into signature help mode where you actually see the arguments that you can write. And yeah. So yeah, that's nice. That's it, I guess.
Yeah, there's like several ideas, a lot of stuff. Definitely need to rewatch this recording, at least the starting part. And also, like, but the only thing that's looks weird is the short names, because like it's going away from the, it might be cryptic at some parts, but maybe I'm gonna get used to it after using it a couple of times. So maybe we can also revisit this later. Maybe we come up with the other naming convention.
And to be honest, I think that's always a discussion, but I think that short names, as long as they are easily identifiable, like easy to separate them from one another, if you think that you are going to choose this language and this framework to create large applications, I don't think it takes a lot of time before you actually start knowing and remembering these short prefixes, especially when you get help from the tooling. And the benefit of it is much shorter code. And when you look at things at a glance, then, so you could do background opacity. In the beginning, that sounds like the most like descriptive naming for it. You end up with a lot of much longer lines, unnecessarily long and complex, because you can see this element would often have a lot more styles than this, and like background, color, red, blah, blah, blah. Already we start having problems with then you need to start moving it into multiple lines and stuff. I think it's just like emojis. Like when an emoji is so much easier to understand though, but when you actually know the meaning of a small set of symbols, then things become much more readable eventually. Because at a glance, when you know that background opacity, let's say you even use the shortest one, BGO, then it doesn't take a lot of time before you internally translate this to background opacity just by glancing at it. And the same with BG instead of background color. So there's a good reason for Tailwind to have these relatively short class names. I think it's very important because you are going to add a lot of class names when you do styling this way. If you just think about how many lines of style sheets we have in Scrimba and most projects, moving all of that complexity into the templates themselves, it's not magical. So it means that, yes, there will be quite a lot of inline style helpers.
Cool. So definitely good stuff. I need to try out the styling again. I mentioned that a couple of times. So I think this would be a good time to wrap up. And then
I agree.
It would be maybe, I don't know if you want to do scheduled discussions with Eric, but
I'm looking forward to him going through this video, and then after he's done that, I think it will be easier for him to give some feedback and discuss this. But he's the one who actually started to get me interested in Tailwind. So I think this will be very useful for him, and I think he will like it.
Cool. So
but
if you're
we
watching,
need to discuss
Eric,
the syntax.
I was just gonna say to Eric, if you're watching, remember to give feedback. So cool, great work, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, talk to you. Bye.
Bye.